After acquiring a new company, a business owner requests the termination of an employee with a disability, believing he is incompetent and unnecessary due to his physical condition, but then this happens. Thomas had always been a man of simple habits and a brilliant mind. Since his youth, he stood out for his sharp intelligence and his ability to solve problems that left others confused. The son of a humble family, Thomas learned early on the value of hard work and dedication. He married Stephanie, his high school sweetheart, a caring and equally hardworking woman. Together, they built a life based on respect, love, and the effort to provide a better future for their two children, Jason and Laura. Thomas was the quintessential dedicated father, present for important moments and always willing to do anything for his family's happiness. Before the accident, Thomas was a dynamic and highly respected professional at the office where he worked. He started his career at the real estate company as an administrative assistant and gradually carved out his space. His talent for solving complex issues caught the attention of his superiors, and he quickly rose to positions of greater responsibility. Thomas was seen by his colleagues as a tireless man, always willing to help and share his knowledge. Besides his impeccable work, he was known for his good humor and his ability to motivate the team, even on the toughest days. At home, Thomas was a thoughtful husband and a loving father. He and Stephanie had a solid relationship, built on trust and camaraderie. Family nights were filled with laughter, simple dinners brimming with affection, and Sunday mornings were dedicated to outings in the park with the kids. Jason, the eldest, admired his father as a hero, and little Laura loved spending afternoons listening to stories invented by Thomas, always filled with adventure and humor. Life seemed perfect, and the family's dreams were modest but full of hope. Everything changed on a summer night when Thomas was returning home after a long day at work. The traffic was chaotic, as usual, and tired, Thomas thought about getting home quickly to enjoy the rest of the day with his family. However, a reckless driver, distracted by their phone, ran a red light and violently collided with Thomas's car. The impact was devastating. Thomas was rushed to the hospital, but the consequences of the accident were severe. He survived, but he was left with permanent paralysis in his legs and arms, able to move only his fingers. Life after the accident was an enormous challenge for Thomas and his family. The first months were filled with painful adjustments and a difficult learning process about the limits imposed by their new reality. Thomas needed time to accept his condition, but with the unconditional support of Stephanie and their children, he found the strength to move forward. They adapted their home to his needs, and little by little, he began to take on his responsibilities again, even if in a different way. Stephanie, who already shared household tasks with her part-time job, became the foundation that supported the family, never failing to encourage Thomas to keep going. Despite his physical limitations, Thomas refused to feel useless. Determined not to let paralysis define him, he learned to use an adapted computer, using his fingers to control functions with precision. Even with the difficulties, Thomas returned to work, now in a position adjusted to his needs but still essential to the company's operation. He performed his tasks with the same competence as before, impressing colleagues with his ability to overcome. Thomas's unique skills, combining technical knowledge with a sharp strategic vision, made him an irreplaceable asset to the team. At work, Thomas was admired and respected. His colleagues saw him as an example of perseverance, and many were inspired by his determination. Even while facing daily challenges, Thomas never complained. On the contrary, he was grateful for every opportunity to contribute and remained focused on giving his best, day after day. His presence in the office was motivating. He always found a way to help, whether by sharing tips on complicated processes or offering words of encouragement to those in need. With his calm wisdom, Thomas became a central figure, someone everyone turned to in times of difficulty. At home, the atmosphere was one of support and affection. Stephanie did everything she could to ensure Thomas didn't feel like a burden and constantly encouraged him to stay active. The children, even at a young age, understood that their father had to adapt, but this did not diminish the admiration they felt for him. Laura, with her sweet demeanor, loved to sit next to Thomas while he worked on the computer, and Jason, now a teenager, drew inspiration from his father's resilience to face his own challenges at school. Life had changed, but the love and unity of the family remained unshakable. Over time, Thomas learned to find joy in the small victories of everyday life. Typing a report without mistakes, helping Jason with his homework, or simply listening to Laura talk about her day at school, all of this became fuel to keep going. He had lost some of his mobility, but he never lost the essence of what made him who he was, a dedicated man, hardworking and determined not to be defined by his limitations. At the end of an ordinary afternoon, the company's employees were called to an unexpected meeting in the conference room. Tension filled the air, as last-minute meetings typically didn't bring good news. Thomas, sitting in his wheelchair near the door, observed the worried faces of his colleagues as they settled in. Daniel, the owner of the company, entered with a serious expression but trying to maintain his usual composure. He positioned himself at the front of the room, cleared his throat, and began to speak. "Good afternoon, everyone," Daniel said, his voice attempting to sound confident. "I know this surprise meeting caught all of you off guard, but I need to share an important piece of news. Starting tomorrow, our company will have a new owner." The employees exchanged glances in murmurs. Thomas watched closely, moving his fingers over the controls of his laptop. He had always had a good relationship with Daniel and was concerned about what this change could mean for everyone. "I sold the company to a highly successful entrepreneur," Daniel continued, trying to sound optimistic. "His name is Mark, and he has an impressive track record of transforming businesses. Mark is bringing new ideas and a new direction for our company." "But why, Daniel?" asked Elizabeth, one of the administrative assistants, visibly anxious. "Wasn't the company doing well? You didn't mention anything about this before." Daniel took a deep breath and replied, trying to calm the tensions. "The company is doing well, Elizabeth, but we've reached a point where we need a fresh perspective to grow even more. I made this decision thinking about our future. Mark is known for his ability to modernize companies and take them to the next level." Thomas listened attentively. Daniel's words were carefully chosen, but he felt a certain discomfort in the subtext. The sense of uncertainty grew, but Thomas chose to remain silent, observing and trying to process the information. The next day, Mark's arrival was marked by even greater buzz. The new businessman entered the company surrounded by two assistants, dressed in a sharp suit and wearing a confident smile that immediately drew attention. He headed straight to the conference room, where all the employees were gathered, eager to meet the new boss. Mark gestured briefly for silence and began to speak, his voice firm and resolute. "Good morning, everyone," Mark said, looking at the employees with a calculating gaze. "My name is Mark, and this company is now part of my business portfolio. I have high expectations for the future here, and I believe that together we can reach new heights." Mark spoke with a certainty that was almost intimidating. He elaborated on his successful career, his management methods, and the importance of efficiency and innovation. Thomas, in the corner of the room, observed closely. Mark didn't seem interested in getting to know the people present, but rather in asserting his presence. After his presentation, Mark walked around the office, scrutinizing everything with a critical eye. He paused for a moment in front of Thomas's desk, studying him without hiding his curiosity. Thomas remained calm, continuing to type slowly on his laptop, but he felt the weight of the new boss's gaze. "Who is he?" Mark asked, turning to Daniel, who was accompanying him on the tour. "What does he do here?" "This is Thomas," Daniel replied in a respectful tone. "He is one of our most valuable team members, responsible for a large part of the complex administrative processes. Even with his physical limitations, he does exceptional work." Mark looked at Thomas with a mix of disdain and skepticism. "Valuable? I see a man in a wheelchair, barely able to type. Are you telling me he is essential?" "Yes," intervened Elizabeth, who was following the tour. "Thomas knows the workings of the company's systems like no one else, he is indispensable." Mark smiled, but it was a cold and condescending smile. With all due respect, I don't see how someone in his condition can be that essential. We need to focus on efficiency and productivity. This kind of situation is not sustainable. Daniel tried to argue, but Mark was already decided. Let's simplify things, Mark said, with a tone that left no room for discussion. Thomas, unfortunately, doesn't fit into the vision I have for the future of this company. Effective immediately, you are dismissed. The office fell into a stunned silence. Thomas remained still, processing what he had just heard. He hadn't expected this to happen so abruptly. Elizabeth tried to intervene again, but Mark was categorical. My decision is made. We need to move forward. Thomas took a deep breath and, with the dignity that always characterized him, calmly replied. I understand, Mr. Mark. I appreciate the opportunity one had here. It was a pleasure working with all of you. Without waiting for another word, Mark turned his back and continued his tour of the office, leaving behind a heavy atmosphere and a Thomas who, despite everything, would not let his pride be shaken by the new boss's lack of empathy. Thomas said his goodbyes to his colleagues, receiving hugs and words of support, but the damage was already done. His place in the company had been taken by a man who hadn't bothered to understand his true value. The days following Thomas's dismissal were a complete disaster for the company. Without him, what had once functioned like a well-oiled machine began to crumble. Projects fell behind schedule, crucial information got lost, and the team seemed disoriented. Daniel, the former owner, was still overseeing the transition, but even he couldn't understand how things had unraveled so quickly. The employees were doing their best, but without Thomas's knowledge and strategic vision, all their efforts felt futile. Mark, noticing the chaos that had ensued, called a meeting with his management team. He sat at the head of the table, clearly frustrated and impatient. I want to understand what's happening here, Mark said, lightly banging on the table. It doesn't make sense for everything to fall apart all at once. Are you telling me that everything depended on one single employee? Elizabeth, one of the longest-serving employees who had always had a close relationship with Thomas, tried to explain. Mr. Mark, we're trying to move forward, but the truth is that Thomas was the heart of our system. He knew every detail of the company's internal operations, and no one else has the knowledge he had. Mark looked incredulous. But you're talking about a man with severe limitations. I fired Thomas because I thought he was a hindrance, not the pillar of the company. Daniel sighed and took the floor. You're only seeing Thomas's physical limitations, but you're not recognizing his true value. He was the one who made everything work, even using just his fingers with limited movement. Thomas developed unique methods to manage what few can. Without him, we're lost. Mark shook his head, absorbing Daniel's words and those of others. He hadn't imagined that Thomas's absence would have such a devastating impact. So, what do you suggest? I clearly made a mistake. But what do I do now? I need to fix this. Daniel looked directly at Mark. The only person who can resolve this situation is Thomas. And the only way to fix it is for you to go to him and ask him to come back. The next day, Mark decided to follow the advice. He got into his car and drove to the modest neighborhood where Thomas lived, feeling a mix of nervousness and regret. The streets were narrow, full of life, with children playing and residents spending time on the sidewalks. Mark stopped in front of Thomas's house, which was simple but tidy and cozy. Mark took a deep breath before knocking on the door. Stephanie, who was in the yard tending to some plants, heard the noise and approached. Good afternoon, sir. Can I help you? She asked, not immediately recognizing who he was. Good afternoon, Mark replied, trying to maintain his composure. I'm Mark, the new owner of the company where your husband worked. I came here to talk to him. Stephanie looked surprised but did not show any negative reaction. Sure, come in. Thomas is in the living room. Mark entered and found Thomas in the living room, using a special computer that he controlled with precise finger movements and voice commands. Thomas looked up and was surprised to see the businessman there. Mr. Mark. I didn't expect to see you here. What brings you to my home? Mark sat down carefully, searching for the right words. Thomas, I came here because I need to acknowledge the mistake I made. I was hasty, I judged you by your appearance and not by your abilities. I didn't see the value you bring to the company. Thomas listened attentively, with the serene expression that always characterized him. I understand your position, Mr. Mark. People often judge by what they see, and it's not always easy to look beyond that. I hold no grudges, but I confess it was difficult to be dismissed from something I love doing. Mark continued, clearly regretful. I was arrogant, Thomas. I thought I knew everything, but I knew nothing. I never imagined you were the true mind behind the company's success. Things are not going well without you, and I'm here to ask you to come back. Thomas looked at Mark, sensing the sincerity in his words. Mr. Mark, I have always dedicated myself to doing my best, not for recognition, but because I believe in what I do. My physical condition does not define me, and I have always sought ways to adapt to remain useful. It's not easy, but I never gave up. Mark nodded, admiring Thomas's humility. I see that now, and that's why I'm here. I need you, Thomas. And I not only want you to come back, but I want you to have better working conditions. I'm willing to offer a significant salary increase and adjust your duties so you can work without feeling overwhelmed. Thomas paused for a few moments before responding. It's not just about the money, Mr. Mark, but about how we are treated. I accept coming back, not only for the company but for the people who believe in my work. But I want to ensure that we will be treated with respect and that my voice will be heard. Mark, feeling a sense of relief and deep respect for Thomas, replied, You have my word, Thomas. I will do what is necessary to ensure you have everything you need, and for the company to recognize the value of all its employees, starting with you. Thomas smiled faintly. Then we have an agreement, Mr. Mark. I will return. With Thomas's return, the company quickly began to bounce back. Mark kept his promise, adjusting Thomas's working conditions and giving him the recognition he deserved. The team, relieved, regained its momentum, and productivity returned to previous levels, if not higher. Thomas became even more respected, not only for his skills but for the strength of character and humility he always demonstrated. Mark learned a lesson that changed his leadership approach, understanding that the true value of people lies not in their appearance but in what they do and how they face their challenges. The company thrived under a new management that now valued each employee, and Thomas, despite all the adversities, continued to be a living example of resilience and determination. Thomas continued to work with the same enthusiasm as always, finding new ways to overcome the daily barriers. At home, the atmosphere was one of joy and gratitude. Stephanie and the children were happy to see him active and valued again. Thomas's life did not return to what it was before the accident, but he continued to live each day with the certainty that his worth went far beyond what the eyes could see. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.